Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Yellow Tape. This is Nidhi and we have Julian. Today's episode is very, very interesting because we have shifted our gears a little bit, but still very relevant to forensic science, of course, because it's Beyond the Yellow Tape. But today's episode is kind of encompasses about expert witness testimony, the demeanor in court, what kind of coaching is required or would be essential if you are presenting in court, and other various interesting topics. So even before I get into the episode and let Julian introduce, please do not forget, you know the drill, guys, to like,
Share,
and
and
subscribe to our
subscribe.
channel. Please do it. It's the information is now, and I'll let Julian introduce our guest.
All right, guys. Thanks for having. Thank you, Nidhi. And today we have John Collins, who's a professional leadership coach, a facilitator, and an author. He has several books out, like The New Superior and 50 Situations Awaiting Every Forensic Scientist. And he has tons of books out. He gives speeches. I met him at one of his talks, one of his workshops about expert witness testimony. He's also the host of the Crime Lab Coach podcast. He drops it every twice a month. And again, he just has tons of things coming out. So stay here, wait till the end of the episode to see what he has coming on the pipeline. And let's get to the episode.
Thank you so much for joining us. The first and foremost question, of course, we have that we know that you studied forensic science from Michigan State University. So, what was the journey like when you, after studying forensic science, to become an expertise coach? Like, why that decision, and what made you choose that kind of a field?
Yeah, you don't run into a lot of professional coaches that used to be forensic scientists and expert witnesses and that sort of thing. Uh, well, it was really driven by things that I experienced in my career that were very, very difficult. I came into forensic science in 1992 was really when I started. My first full-time job was in March of 1993. And I'll just say that I experienced just really bad management and at times abusive management. And that really inspired me to learn about leadership because my dad was a HR director for an architectural firm. So I really grew up in kind of an HR, management thinking type of environment. But I loved what I did. I loved forensic science. I loved being a firearm and tool mark examiner. Got to work a lot of really cool cases. But I just got to the point where I started to develop an interest in management and started talking about it. And then I became a lab director at the age of 30. But I just got to the point where I'd sort of had enough, and I wanted to start my own practice, teaching and coaching and so forth. And I've been doing it for about 10 years now.
That's amazing. Do you also go for expert testimony, or do you only prep people who goes for expert testimony?
I still do testify, but I'm extremely selective about what cases I get involved with. So expert witnessing is not really a part of my business or how I make a living. I do it because I really enjoy providing that kind of service, and I love I love the way it challenges you and the competencies that you have to develop. Yeah, it's pretty rare now that I testify.
So when you say
Mm.
bad, I'm so sorry, Julian.
Go ahead, go ahead.
So when you say bad before, when you're talking about, like, was it how the analysts were giving their expert testimony, or was it the processes in the lab, or was it the management that was not training them enough? Like, what was the triggering factor for you to see that coaching is required in this realm of forensics?
Yeah, I noticed it, at originally at the what we would describe as the unit supervisor level. It just the way people were treated, the way that things were managed. But to me, it was more what really got my attention was the way that I saw people being treated. And it was really, I just knew that it was really inappropriate. And then when I became an accreditation inspector, I saw the stuff happening in labs that I was inspecting. And I really started to develop this opinion that, gosh, we really have a problem in this profession. And so I really gravitated towards trying to solve that problem and helping forensic people understand the importance of management and self-mastery, as critical components to our profession. And then it just turned into a business very organically.
I'll let you take them.
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess to jump back a little bit, you were saying that I guess you give a lot of coaching on expert witness testimony. So can we just break that down? Can you define what an expert witness is?
The way that I would just describe it conversationally is that an expert witness is an individual who is clearly distinguishable in terms of their knowledge and their expertise from everybody else. And so because of that distinguishable knowledge and expertise, they are able to help the court answer questions that it has in resolving the dispute that is before it, because everything that a court does deals with a dispute of some sort. Even a criminal trial is a dispute between, the state and the defendant. And so, but the critical part of that definition is distinguishable. And so it's easy to get knowledge. There's a lot of people with knowledge. It's never been easier to become knowledgeable, but expertise requires a depth accompanied by actual experience applying that knowledge that's very, very limited. And the expert is in a position to answer truthfully and accurately the questions of the court.
As we're talking a lot about court and expert testimony, would you mind, because we are well aware that we have not touched this topic yet in our podcast, would you mind explaining what a court proceeding, briefly, and what the role of the judge, the jury, the prosecutions, and the defenses are, so we can make clear distinction as to when an expert comes in, who are they serving, and what is it like in the court?
Sure. So to put it in pretty basic terms, and a lot of times we don't think of it this way, a criminal trial is a lawsuit. Okay, so the people or the state are filing a lawsuit against the defendant has to answer that. So the court is a place where this dispute is litigated and adjudicated, whatever you want to call it. And so there are people that are involved in this process, right? So you have the judge who serves in what is often described as the gatekeeper role, making sure that the integrity of the proceedings and the evidence that the jury is allowed to see is done competently. And then you have the defendant who's basically been sued by the state for the crime that was committed, and they have to answer to it. And so the defendant is represented by a defense attorney, and the people are represented by a state's attorney, or what's called a prosecutor or a district attorney, right? And so you have this proceeding that takes place, which is basically where the judge will hear the presentation of evidence, between the two parties.
That's thank you so much. I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth. So when you're doing your trainings and you're coaching people, do you also give coaching to expert witnesses that they're not overstating the evidence? Or where do you think the major flaw you see when they're testifying? If you could pinpoint a few aspects where you think it's very necessary for people to.
Yeah, well, to answer the first part of your question, I had a lot of experience with the courts, although the number of times that I testified was not nearly as high as what some people. There's some people that I know that have testified, several hundred times. I testified about 130 times. you know, but I testified in death penalty cases. I testified, most of them violent crimes, so pretty intense trials. I testified in Daubert hearings, Fry hearings, motions to suppress, right? Different types of proceedings. So, so I have a lot of experience, and I just, for some reason, it comes naturally to me. I have sort of I've always been fairly, even at a young age, pretty good communicator. I'm pretty good at thinking. I'm a logical thinker. And so I'm kind of wired to be a good expert witness. And so I take an interest in teaching that. And over time, I developed a course. And I've also coached, for example, doctors that are going to be testifying in a medical malpractice trial. So sometimes a law firm will hire me to coach a potential expert witness.
Mhm. Could you speak, since you are like, you just talk about how you might help a doctor in a medical malpractice, could you like, I guess briefly explain how testifying as an expert witness in a forensics case, in a criminal case such as that, and something like a medical malpractice, how does that differ in your coaching style?
I don't know that there's too much of a difference in my coaching style, depending on whether it's, you know, let's say a civil matter like malpractice versus a criminal matter. I don't know that changes too much. The thing that I would say comes into play is that there's a different standard that is being met. So usually in a civil case, you basically, the ruling goes to or the plaintiff, the person that is suing for damages, whatever that is has a responsibility of meeting a level of proof by what they call the preponderance of the evidence, which basically means over 50% chance. Right. So for those that remember perhaps the O.J. Simpson trial, he was acquitted in the criminal trial, which is the standard for the criminal trials beyond a reasonable doubt. But in a civil matter, it's just over 50%. So he was convicted in civil trial for being responsible for those deaths. So, so in terms of coaching, there is a level of intensity that exists in a criminal matter versus civil.
Gotcha.
One, I don't know, I could be completely wrong, but the PDs like New York Police Department, OCME, or Boston, don't they themselves have in-house training for when the criminal is go for testifying? Then why do you think that it would be necessary for them to come to you, for example, on an external agency to help them train if they're doing it in-house?
Well, when they're doing it in-house, they're taking a different perspective than I do. What happens in-house, so let's say for like the mock or moot court process, you're really trying to make sure that the individual is technically competent, right? They know how to do the work, they know how to answer technical questions. So I remember, I'm a firearms examiner by trade, and I remember getting ready in the moot court and testifying and having to remember what was the muzzle velocity of a 357 Magnum bullet, and or just very technical stuff, and being able to preparing the witness to be able to answer difficult questions related to their technical expertise. What I'm focusing on is the quality, is building the strength of the human being that is going to be testifying. So I'm not interested, well, not I'm interested, but I don't deal with the technical matters. I deal with body language and things that are rooted in human psychology. So that's an area that I specialize in.
Makes sense. So the demeanor as to how they are presenting themselves in court, and are those things that falls under your umbrella as well? Like,
Say that again, I'm sorry.
oh, I'm so sorry. So it's the way that they're presenting themselves in court, not much about as to what they're presenting, but how they're presenting, I guess, is
Most of it is, but I do get into recommending what they should be presenting. But that all relates to being effective in being able to explain the validity of their scientific conclusions.
So I guess changing gears a little bit. This is the Beyond the Yellow Tape first. We actually have your book, 50,
I did
50,
too.
50 situations awaiting every forensic scientist. And there's a couple of things that we just wanted to ask you about the a couple of chapters in the book. So you talk about anxiety when going on the stand, which makes a ton of sense, but you also speak about servant's mindset versus performer's mindset. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, that deals with your sense of identity in the moment, or the role that you see yourself playing, right? So just in general, all of us have roles that we play in our lives, right? So, each one of you might be playing the role right now. You're playing the role of podcast host, right? But you may also play the role of brother or sister or father or mother, or or son or daughter. Those are other roles. There's a lot of different roles that we play in life. So we tend to psychologically prepare ourselves to play certain roles. Okay. Now, when you testify in court as an expert witness, you're playing a role, right? And that role is to obviously be able to answer the questions of the court. However, one of the things that we do is we think emotionally about the role that we play, and then that affects how we feel about the role that we're playing. So when most of us make the mistake of playing what's called a performer, or having what's called a performer's mindset, which means that you have an expectation of me, and now I have to meet that demand, right? So even as of course, I'm pretty experienced with this kind of stuff, but if somebody came on as one of your guests, like me, and really didn't have much experience, I might adopt a performer's mindset, which says that you two have high expectations of me and I have to deliver, right? And so that triggers anxiety, because psychologically you view it as a threat. But if I come on this podcast, which I do, if I come on your podcast and instead of having a performer's mindset, I take a servant's mindset, that is a completely different sense of self, right? And as a servant, I don't think of you as having demands or expectations of me. I think of you as having a need that I can perhaps help you achieve. And that prevents the triggering of the anxiety. But it's a mistake that a lot of us do, and it's one of the reasons that public speaking is so feared, is because people adopt a performer's mindset, and so they're in trouble right from the start.
That makes sense.
Interesting. So, no, it's okay. It'll go on a very sidetrack. So basically, when say, for example, if I'm testifying, rather than me trying to justify how I did my steps, it is better for me to just state what I did, and not fill in the holes that maybe the defense or the prosecution are trying to fill me. Just present my results in a way that it's not overstated, like you're trying to please someone.
Yeah, it's a good question that you're asking. When I'm talking about performers versus servant mindset, all I'm really talking about is the internal sense of self that I'm bringing to the moment, and the reason why I'm in that moment. Okay. Now, what I will say to your question is that if I adopt a performer's mindset, you can, which is probably where your question is going, that you can be more likely to be vulnerable to over testifying or to trying to impress and go too far. Whereas a servant mindset is going to probably sort of help you regulate yourself to just stay within the moment and don't go, don't testify too much or too little on a particular matter. So yeah, I think that's probably where that would come into play.
Would you mind giving us a glimpse as to how would you deal with such a situation when you are coaching people to have that distinction in their head? Like, what are your tips for those situations? Like, how do you prep them?
Well, I'll tell you, depending on how serious the case was, and how much time and resources we had for me to prepare a witness. One of the things that I might do is there's two assessments, pretty strongly scientifically validated assessments that I use in my practice, and one of them is called the Big Five personality dimensions. It measures 5 dimensions of human personality, and it's considered the most scientifically valid of the personal trait assessments dealing with personality. But I would want to do an assessment, and I would want to know how vulnerable that individual is to arrogance, self-aggrandizement, right? Real grandiose, flowery type of stuff, and then help them be aware of that, and be mindful of how they typically see themselves, and then how much of a difference is it going to be for them to adopt a servant's mindset. Some people are arrogant, and some people are very humble, and then there's a spectrum in between.
Right.
So
much fun to deal with such an interesting group of people from such wide ranges and then tame them to one. Oh, love your job. I'll let you ask you the question.
Oh yeah. Also in the book, there's a chapter where you were talking. You know how we're in court, and I guess maybe a lawyer may try to have a expert witness answer a question, but in such a way that it won't get the whole answer out the way the witness wants to. And you were talking about macro versus micro truths. So could you explain what those terms mean?
yeah, so a macro truth in a criminal justice context is just the sequence of events that took place dealing with a crime, right? That was the context of that chapter that you're referring to. And so in court, there's basically the events that happened, and then there's the statements that witnesses give, that were victims or they were eyewitnesses, right? And so those are macro truths. They're going to talk about, what happened. And as an expert witness, the reason I even mention this in the book is that as an expert witness, we don't know what all of the macro truths are, particularly in a criminal justice context. I actually think working in a civil case, you have access to more information than somebody in a publicly funded crime laboratory. But the macro truths are outside of my knowledge sometimes. If I go into the courtroom, I don't know what witnesses have testified to. There's a lot that I don't know. The micro truths that I focus on are what I know, the information that I have, the observations that I made, the work that I did, that makes me the only individual that knows those really fine, nuanced points. And so that's kind of what I was referring to, and just making note of the fact that expert witnesses don't have knowledge of all of those macro truths about what happened. So you kind of are just testifying within the confines of the questions that you're being asked. You don't know what the expert before you testified to.
Right.
You're always in the dark on that.
That is so true. Just shifting gears a little bit, you have a very impressive resume, and especially with your involvements in multiple high-profile cases. So we just each briefly talk about a few cases and get to know as to how was your experience and what did you help in getting the reform. So firstly, talking about your involvement in the Atlanta serial bombing cases, which includes the bombing of the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta. So would you mind sharing with us some details about the case and what your involvement was in that case in particular?
Yeah, my involvement in the original Olympic bombing case was really to provide support to one of my colleagues that was analyzing the nails that were packed in the bomb, and those nails were, used as shrapnel. I also did some work, investigative work, trying to get information on these steel plates that he used to create a shape charge. He kind of encased the bomb in steel plate to try to direct the blast in a particular area. So I was involved in that part of the investigation. Then when the serial bombings happened, he used a different kind of nail. And so I forensically analyzed all of those nails in the serial bombings. I think there was 4 or 5 bombs. And what we were doing is trying to find patterns and looking at the machine marks that are left on nails during the manufacturing process. So it was that was a really interesting case, very, very intense because there was such international attention to it. You know, our lab, we had to report all the way up to the White House because they wanted to know why the United States couldn't solve the bombing of its Olympics on its own soil. So we were under a lot of pressure.
That is so interesting. So of course, like DNA testing was not have been big back then. So do you guys like you said, you were looking at impressions that were made on the nails from the instrument. Did you save those nails in the future for DNA testing? Just
No,
right.
you wouldn't get one of the problems with I mean, as great as DNA is it's very, very fragile in intense heat. And so there's nothing left on this stuff. Yeah, now getting DNA off of the bag, the handbag, you know, that the bomb was in, that kind of stuff is possible, but pretty difficult. And even then, you're looking for touch DNA. It's not like you got a blood stain or a semen stain or something like that. You're looking for touch DNA, and that's really difficult. So, yeah, it was. They did some DNA work, but we were able to solve the case even without that.
Yeah. Very
Wow.
interesting. And also the nails that you would have tested for machine impressions, like you said, as because of the heat, they would also have been so damaged for you to even like see as to where the patterns would match and like do the examination itself. It's intense, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's amazing, especially with a dynamite bomb. The Olympic bomb was basically a gunpowder bomb in a pipe. There were pipe bombs.
True.
The other serial bombings that came after that were all dynamite, and so it just really shredded things up. The nails were all of the nails were bent, and sometimes
Right.
twisted in a knot. But yeah, it was a really memorable case that I was 26 years old, and it's the biggest case I ever worked. It changed me as a person. So for the better, I think, I hope.
No, that's intense.
Crazy.
Especially with the pressure and all. I'm so sorry, with the pressure of like working and getting the results out, and then you want the bias to be involved, you also don't want to be wrong. So
Yeah, and there was some difficult stuff going on in the field. You know, we had a lot of egos amongst our investigators, and that caused problems. And so, yeah, but it's intense. I learned something that people are really, really impacted by the stress of the moment. It changes people and how they behave, and you have to kind of understand that as you go through life.
Definitely. You were to go off that topic actually a little more. So when you're looking at, I don't know if you testified in that case, but if you did, something as maybe niche as explosives that people are not hearing about every day, or something like bite marks or bloodstain pattern analysis. What are your tips, or like how do you get people ready to testify on a really, really niche field that the juror, maybe the judge, has rarely even heard anyone else testify about?
Yeah, that's a really great question because there are some forensic practices that are heavily scrutinized. You know, you mentioned bite mark. Forensic odontology definitely is one. Footwear impressions. You know, I mean, what they call the pattern identification sciences. You know, latent fingerprints, firearms and tool marks, that kind of stuff. So, and blood stain interpretation. So, the answer to your question is that it really has to be done ahead of the trial. When you're dealing with a niche kind of a discipline, that you've really got to do your homework and you have to be prepared. And a couple of things that I recommend to some clients that are in this position is always have on hand a foundational statement of scientific validity that is basically a document that you keep that clearly and unambiguously establishes the reason why what you do is scientifically valid. And that includes references, a bibliography, references to sources, and all this kind of stuff, and have that with you and provide that 3 copies to whatever attorney is calling, particularly if it's the prosecution, because then they have some discovery responsibilities. But I would always make 3 copies: prosecution, defense, and the court. And so then you really have to be conversant, and you have to know the scientific basis of your work. Let's say it's bloodstain and pattern interpretation, right? You have to know your stuff, and you have to know it so well that you can talk about it, very fluidly, even when you're being asked really difficult questions. So, and then the third step to that is I really recommend that, based on your statement of validity, that you provide the direct examining attorney, which in a lot of cases is the prosecutor.
Right.
You provide them with what are called predicate questions that make sure that during your voir dire or the direct examination, that you're establishing the scientific basis of what you do and what you did in that particular case. So if you do those 3 things, you're going to be better prepared, and then the judge and the trier of fact, which is usually the jury, are going to be able to look at you and what you testified to and say, yeah, this guy or this gal's credible.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Definitely.
Do you think
Nitty?
do you think when they're testifying in court, especially with DNA and all this other pattern analysis, there is jury usually have, or the judge or the people in the audience have the CSI effect, and they're expecting a lot more testing to be done, a lot more answers than the expert could provide? Like, do you often run across certain situations like this?
Yeah, I think the CSI effect still exists, but I don't think it exists as badly as it did from about 1995 to maybe about 2005, somewhere around there, because that was following the O.J. Simpson trial, and you had all these television shows coming out, The New Detectives, CSI, Forensic Files. And so there was this expectation. My sense is it's not quite as strong as it used to be. But basically what it is it's the expectation of the jury that certain things be done, because they just think that that's what would have happened in a television show that they watched. I've never been too concerned about it. I think you just have to that really gets it really gets into the evidence that's collected from the crime scene. The CSI effect even impacts that, where you get investigators collecting so many different things, and they collect things that it really makes no sense that they collected it. Or, you can solve the case perfectly well with testing 5 samples for DNA. There's not a need to do 30. And the CSI effect creates issues with that.
I can imagine that.
Julian has those experiences.
So back to, I guess, some of your history. You also were part of meetings with the Attorney General Eric Holder about the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, and in like mass shootings and mass shootings in general. So could you explain how that went and how that came about?
But I was on a list of firearm experts, and so I went into this very ornate. It's basically the vice president's equivalent of the Oval Office, and went in, and I was sitting with these maybe 20 other experts. There were like firearm manufacturing CEOs, just really it was a really interesting group of experts. And we're kind of sitting around this table waiting for something to happen. And Attorney General Holder walks in, and he was sitting 2 seats down from me. And it was real serious stuff, trying to figure out why this happens. But the reason they happen, as I was trying to get to earlier, is that shooters are not going into schools because they want to kill kids. They're going into schools because they want to create emotional pain for the public. And these are people that feel horrible in their own lives, and they want everybody else to feel as bad as they do. And they think to themselves, well, geez, what can I do that will make society feel as bad as I do? Oh, I have an idea. I'm going to go into a school and I'm going to shoot up a bunch of kids. Right? That's going to make people upset. And that's why they do it.
Yeah, I've not heard a shooting in an old age home.
Say that again?
Like a shooting in an old age home.
Oh my goodness. I don't even want to think about that.
Right? Because of course that is extremely painful, but then I'm not putting any, I don't know, like,
Oh, I see what you're saying. That's why
yeah,
they're going to school. Yeah, right.
That's what it with the kids, yeah.
right?
Try
Because
to cause more pain. They're
yeah,
trying to
cause
cause
more
more pain.
pain. Of course, like losing an older person.
Yeah, no, it's a good point.
Yeah. Oh my God. I never thought of it that way.
Right. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
I hope it doesn't happen anywhere, but it's just interesting to think as to how people are thinking.
Yeah, no, it is. It's scary.
Yeah, it's tough.
Sorry, it's shifting gears a little bit. So, considering you were a part of this discussion, and would you mind discussing a few public safety strategies that we as a people could adopt in this kind of disrupting situations or events?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think, if- these types of events have been happening for a long time. In fact, even back in the first part of the 20th century, like around, I want to say it was like 1930s, 1940s, there was a school bombing here in Michigan and killed a lot of kids. The availability of firearms kind of changes that. But I think in terms of strategy, in terms of answering your question, one of the things that has to happen is there has to be much better coordination and cooperation among criminal justice agencies. And the way that they, not only with each other, but the way that they individually interact with different parts of society and different institutions in society, like schools or hospitals and so forth. And so, you sometimes hear the term coordinated healthcare, which is a term to describe the intercommunication amongst all these different players in somebody's treatment, doctors, nurses, physical therapists, whatever it may be. What we're going to have to start doing is we need more coordinated safety that is not just about law enforcement responding to people doing bad things. It has to be coordinated to prevent these crimes from happening. We have to know what are the warning signs of mental illness, emerging or emotional disorders. Because these are individuals that are very, very sick. Sane people do not go into school and mow down kids, right? They're sick. And so it's got to be dealt with as such, but you can't deal with it if all of these different players don't coordinate well with each other. And I know in my experience that, police and fire, they've got some big egos in their command structure. And it can really make it difficult for them to interact with different agencies. And so if we could create that kind of interaction and collaboration and cooperation, then what we would be able to do is we'd be able to recognize much sooner when a child, for example, starts to show the signs of disturbance or sociopathy or potential for psychopathy, so that the chance of that individual committing a horrific crime goes down considerably. We're never going to be able to reduce it 100%, but we can certainly reduce it remarkably.
That is so true. But
Right.
I also feel like, of course, that's a thing that should be addressed. But like even thinking about it, like when I used to go to school and we had this monitor flashing about how to take shelter in certain situations and what to react with if you have an active shooter, I think that itself is very traumatizing for the people as well. Like
Oh, yeah.
think about like smaller kids being trained what to do when there's an active a shooter in the building.
Yeah.
Like people should understand like you also are digging a grave for the kids to fall under that trap as well, because I don't
Well,
know,
yeah,
you
I
know,
mean, I mean, I can't even imagine being, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old and having to go through evacuation drills and being
Right.
told that there are adults out there that would like to come in and kill me. Like I
yes,
can't just even to your point, just even the attempt to prevent this is really, really scary. I'll just share something with you real quick. And this is one of the reasons I got into forensics, I think, is that when I was 7 years old, 7, 8 years old, that was 1977, 1978, around there. I grew up in Oakland County, Michigan, and we had what was called the Oakland County Child Killer, which was the murder of children by the same individual. And the kids that were being killed were my age, and their bodies were being found within 20 miles of my house where I grew up. And I remember uh, police officers coming to our school and talking about stranger danger. And, and just people being on edge. And then I started to hear about what was happening, and kids hear it on the news, they start talking with each other. And it really affected me. As a child, I just always kind of felt vulnerable. I felt I was scared of being snatched up, and so I wanted to go into law enforcement because to feed that security. But my parents, I had really good parents, thankfully, and they recognized that I had some scientific aptitudes. And Michigan State has a forensic program. Why don't you think about that? And that's what I ended up going into.
yeah, that's exactly
Mhm.
like you took it in a very positive spin to a point that you're now helping people get there and get better and all of those.
Right.
Yeah,
Not everybody has the same trajectory,
right, right.
which is just, oh my God.
Well, we're all so unique, right? I mean,
Yes.
we're all going to respond to things differently.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, that's yeah, there's a lot of different kinds of people in the human population, not just the way that we look, right? Like our skin color or the shape of our eyes because of our ethnicity, um, but just our talents and our attitudes and our emotions and the way that we're wired. I mean, it's crazy how much variance there is. So we all respond to things differently, but at the very low end of the spectrum, there are certain very small percentage of the human population, but a very small number of people who are very, very vulnerable to certain kinds of traumas in life. And if you get the perfect storm and it goes undetected, that's when you get some really bad stuff happening.
Yeah.
Mhm. Crazy.
Um, I'll let you ask.
Oh, so I guess to switch gears off that more somber topics. So John, you have books, The 50 Situations Awaiting Every Forensic Scientist, The New Superior. You give countless talks, and you have a podcast called the Crime Lab Coach Cast that you shoot twice a month, I believe.
Twice a month, yeah.
All right. So is there anything new that you have coming out down the pipeline?
Yeah, I'm going to be this Monday, the current president, that February 5th. I'm going to be talking with the current president of the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors, and he's the chief of
Okay.
laboratories for the New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. And just really, really interesting guy. And so that is going to be that's going to go out Monday. We had a really interesting conversation. I've also got some interesting stuff that I'm going to be talking about that deals with the scientific basis of the pattern identification sciences, kind of like what we were talking about earlier. You know, why is there scientific validity in bloodstain pattern interpretation, or, you know, footwear impressions, or whatever it is. So yeah, I love it. I've got some interesting people that that one guy I'm trying to line up. In fact, I'm not going to give you the details on it because I don't know. He actually reached out to me uh, to see if I'd be interested in having him on the podcast, and
Right.
so I'm optimistic I'll be able to get him on. But basically, he is basically a doctor that interviewed a famous serial killer in prison, and I'm going to have him on the show and talk about that, and a little bit more about what we've talked about here, right? About that
Wow.
sociopathy, and so yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, nice.
Sense.
Such interesting work you do. Oh my God, I'm so mesmerized. So we have a few more questions. Um, Based on your experience and expertise, where do you see the future trend, foresee the future trend in public safety and leadership go?
Yeah, I think that we need much, much better coordination across criminal justice agencies, and the way that criminal justice agencies interact with the public. That really, really has to improve. And so what that does is that ensures that we can start preventing crime. It's not really honorable to be in a profession where you just try to react to crime. We want to figure out ways to prevent crime from happening. And so I think the trends that I hope to see and that we're going to need to see is a rethinking of what it means to, number one, enforce the law, what it means to monitor in good faith the mental health of children and vulnerable people in our society, and that there be, you know, kind of an honorable, compassionate way of engaging with the public. I'm talking about criminal justice agencies, so that there is so that our individual societies and the people, or I should say communities, and the people that live in them are having their most basic of needs met. Which and if that is the need for mental health care, then that can be better identified. But justice agencies that don't talk to each other and that are loaded up with a bunch of egos in the command structure, they're not good at this stuff. And that's why we aren't doing very well when it comes to crime prevention.
Yeah, because if there is no crosstalk happening between agencies, at police departments, and there is no crosstalk between those police departments and the mental health departments as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Just
yeah.
there's no you've got to really kind of soften your soul in order to collaborate with a wide variety of agencies and individuals. And if you don't if you don't do that, then you're just not going to be at your best. And in all honesty, and this is just an estimate, I think that our criminal justice system is really operating at about 20 to 30% of its capacity.
Oh,
That if that it is limited by the behaviors of people in it and their attitudes. And it's an attitude that's driven by, we got to catch bad guys and throw them in jail, right? And it's got to be more nuanced and thoughtful than that.
along with that, like there are
Agreed.
egos, there's also racial bias and where they're catching those people from, what part of the society they are getting in. So there are so many other factors as well at play,
Yeah,
right?
there's a lot of factors, and there's a lot of data that shows, you know, those the crime trends, the arrest trends, the adjudication
Yeah.
trends, and they're pretty complicated.
Do you offer coaching to police departments in regards to these aspects? Like, are they willing to listen to what you have to say and what suggestions? Just an offbeat question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I do. In fact, I coached a chief of police for a better part of a year a while back, and so I really enjoy coaching criminal justice professionals, certainly police commanders. I work with a lot of forensic people, but I don't. The police commanders kind of hold a special place in my heart because they have some unique pressures that they're dealing with, And
Right.
so I've got different levels of services that I provide. I just try to get people, in the door, let me do my assessments, learn a little bit about them, and I can give them some help really quickly. And then if there's a good fit, we can work together for a longer period of time. But I think that coaching can be a vitally important way to support that effort to get better coordination and collaboration across the criminal justice landscape.
Very true. And have you
I agree.
seen your coaching turn into something good where you were like, oh, this is something that I wanted them to do in a better way, and people have actually enunciated those suggestions? Would you have an example of that?
Oh yeah, I've had several coaching sessions where I was working with with a client. I can think of one client in particular. She is in a very prominent position, and she was having this was in a university setting, and she reported to the president of the university. It shows you how high up she was or is, and she was having problems with that president, and so and didn't really know what to do. So working through it, we had 4 sessions, and I gave her some things to think about. And a short time later, found out that she was able to take some of the things that we had talked about, and she found a new job in a different organization. And so that kind of stuff happens. And then I love it when I hear clients that have to have a difficult conversation, like with a boss or a stakeholder, and they want help in how to approach that conversation. That happens a lot. And then I get an email back or phone call back that says, John, it went great. I really appreciate you helping me prepare for that. So I love getting that kind of feedback. Makes you feel good.
Right, absolutely.
Definitely.
That's amazing. Lovely. Um, Julian, the last one. Sorry, you can go ahead.
Oh, I'm good. I love that whole where you talked about the future and how we're only working at 20 to 30%. I'm
Yeah.
amen to that.
Yeah.
One last thing. Do you have any workshops coming up that people would like to know of, or you're teaching something that we can let the audience know?
Yeah, actually, and this is kind of a fresh announcement, but I have a really good online workshop that we just launched. It's called Show Up Strong, and it's about how to build your authoritative presence through assertive thinking and conflict readiness. It's a big challenge that a lot of people have, that they might be very, very smart, but they struggle to have assertiveness and to have kind of an authoritative, credible presence. And so it's self-paced. You just go in, you buy the workshop, and you take it at your pace. So you can go to Critical Victories / Show Up Strong, all one word. And it's a really great workshop. We've got actually about 15 people going through it right now. We're getting really good feedback. So it's just trying to help people show up with different personalities, difficult personalities that they may have to deal with, and show up in a really effective way.
Mm,
Amazing.
great.
We will share that link for sure in our podcast.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. It was such a pleasure to talk with you. Oh my God, so many questions.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you for the invitation, reaching out. It was Julian, it was good to see you again. And
Great to see you.
yeah, great.
Thank you so much once
Okay.
Thank you
again.
so much.
I hope you have a good night. Bye.
Great seeing you too. Bye.
Have a great one. Bye.